doing my first ever YouTube video. For this video I decided to do a music review. Right here I'm holding a really great black metal album. Sort of a demo, but to me it's really like a full-length album. It's from Sargeist. The album's called Tyranny Returns, and it's pretty much the first release you can really get from them. I managed to pick this album up from a local used store. They sell used videos and music and whatnot, and I was very excited to see that it was actually there. This is an album that you can sometimes bump into in stores, but it's not really common or popular, seeing as it's sort of black metal. I've been a Sargeist fan for a long time. I'd actually first purchased Disciple of the Heinous Path, and I really liked what I heard there, so I went back to buy their other releases, and this one included, obviously. There's a few things I'd like to talk about with this album. The first thing I'd like to talk about is sort of the overall style of the album and the way they did the songwriting on this. If you're familiar with Sargeist's later work, like their last album, this is quite a bit different from it. It does feel quite a lot more experimental. You have songs like the opening track, which is, a sort of atmospheric track using instrumentals instead of, the standard black metal sound. And they did that through 3 tracks on the album: the preludium, the postludium, and the interludium, which are sort of pacers to break up the album a little bit. And even though it's not the typical Sargeist sound, I really enjoyed it. It added a lot of atmosphere to the album, and I thought it was a great addition to what I was more used to with the more modern work. They did something similar on the following album to this, but on their latest work they haven't really done that as much. The general feel I get from this album is that it has a lot of different styles coming into it. You can hear the atmospheric sounds, you can hear the thrash sounds. You can tell they were sort of experimenting with their sound at the time that they created this album, and that's actually not a bad thing. I really enjoyed that. You have songs like Iron, Blood, and Blasphemy, where they're going with that heavy thrash sound, which is not typical for the average black metal band. And then you have songs like the Interludium and even Night of Sacred Wisdom, which to me was quite a big surprise concerning what I was used to in their sound. It's almost like a sort of experimental ambient track with a bit of heavy drumming in there and actually sort of clean vocals, which is very unusual for this band. So this is an album that's definitely full of surprises that most Sargeist fans would not be completely familiar with. There are a few tracks on here that are sort of just straight rock sounds, like the Anti-Human Black Metal Wrath and Dark Fortress. And although these songs are not terrible, I didn't find them quite as interesting or appealing as some of the more interesting songs. And like I said, my highlights from this album are probably Night of Sacred Wisdom, like the Postludium, which is actually quite an epic song and very unusual for their usual style. I also really liked Iron, Blood, and Blasphemy, because Sargeist sort of went thrash metal, and it sounds really interesting and very appealing to me. It's not something they really quite reproduced on their later work. So overall, I'd like to say that this is an album I definitely enjoy, and I would actually recommend this to anyone who likes black metal, or of course any Sargeist fans out there, even though they're not really popular right now, I'm assuming. There are a few points I'd like to make with the production on this album. I'd first like to note that I am not any sort of production whore. I like lo-fi music, and this definitely qualifies as lo-fi production. There's no question about it. A few things I'd like to note is that you can tell that on certain songs, certain instruments are more prominent than others, but it does actually get switched around quite a bit. Like on some tracks, you can hear there's more influence from the drumming or more emphasis on that. And other songs, you can really hear the the guitars being the main focus. So I kind of like that they switched it around, and even though the production is sort of lo-fi, it's sort of mostly evenly lo-fi between the different instruments, which sounds silly, but it sort of works. I thought the vocals on this release were not quite as strong as on perhaps their later releases. They're sort of tuning their sound, and it sort of sounds like standard black metal growliness, or whatever you like to call it, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just not the greatest part of the album. And also, like I mentioned earlier, some of those standard rock songs on here are not quite up to par with the other tracks on the album. But still, overall, Sargeist Tyranny Returns. This is a really great purchase for whatever you pay for it, really. I really enjoy this album, and I come back to it and listen to it over and over again. And especially, the interlude songs, Iron Blood and Blasphemy, Night of Sacred Wisdom, Impaler Prince is also a good track. You can really hear that they're going with that sort of overarching atmosphere that they've added on their later albums, especially Disciple of the Heinous Path. So you can sort of hear the influences before they really became prominent. So yeah, that's my review of this album. I'm not going to give it a real score, but that's my opinion. But check it out, Sargeist, great band, very underrated. Not popular, but still very good. Thank you. Bye.